The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden glow over the quiet streets. Birds chirped in the distance, and the world seemed at peace. But for 8-year-old Lily, the day was just beginning. While most kids her age were still tucked in bed, dreaming of school recess and their favorite cartoons, Lily was already on the move. She adjusted the straps of her worn-out backpack, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the dusty road. Today, just like every other day, she had a long journey ahead. 10 miles, on foot, through scorching heat and pouring rain, just to see her mother. Lily's mother, Sarah, was locked away in a cold, gray prison cell, a place no child should ever have to visit. But for Lily, it was the only place where she could still feel her mother's warmth, even if it was just through a thick pane of glass. She didn't fully understand why her mom was there. Grown-ups always spoke in whispers when she asked. All she knew was that Sarah wasn't a bad person. She had made a mistake, one she regretted every single day. And now, she was paying the price. But that didn't change how much Lily loved her. The first few times Lily made the trip, she was scared. The roads were long, the sidewalks cracked, and the world felt so big. Cars sped past her, strangers gave her odd looks, and her tiny legs ached from walking so far. But she never stopped, never hesitated, not even for a second. Because at the end of that long road was her mother, waiting with teary eyes and a sad smile. That was all the motivation Lily needed. She had tried to take the bus once, but the driver turned her away. "Where are your parents, sweetie?" he had asked. Lily didn't know what to say. Telling the truth meant she might get in trouble. And if she got in trouble, she wouldn't be able to see her mom. So she had no choice but to keep walking. 10 miles there, 10 miles back, every single day. The prison guards had gotten used to seeing her. At first, they thought she was just another visitor, tagging along with an adult. But when they realized she was making the trip alone, their hearts ached. They weren't allowed to interfere. Rules were rules, but that didn't mean they didn't feel for the little girl. Some of them started bringing her small things. A bottle of water, a granola bar, sometimes even a little candy. But no matter how much kindness they showed, they couldn't change the rules. Lily and her mother could only talk through the glass. No hugs, no holding hands, no warmth. One guard in particular, Officer Daniels, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He had worked at the prison for years, seen countless visitors come and go, but there was something about Lily that got to him. Maybe it was her eyes, the way they held both innocence and pain. Maybe it was the way she smiled, even when her heart was clearly breaking. Or maybe it was just the simple fact that no child should have to go through this. One day, as Lily sat across from her mother in the visiting room, pressing her tiny hands against the glass, Officer Daniels watched closely. He saw the way Sarah's hands trembled on the other side, the way her voice cracked when she told Lily how much she loved her. And then, he saw it. Lily's shoes. The soles were practically gone. She had walked so many miles that the fabric was barely holding together. That was the moment everything changed. Officer Daniels tried to swallow the lump in his throat, but he couldn't. His eyes burned, and for the first time in years, he felt something break inside him. He had spent so much time enforcing the rules, making sure the prison ran as it should, but standing there, watching an 8-year-old girl suffer just to see her mother. He knew he couldn't just stand by anymore. And then, right there in the middle of the cold, gray prison, in front of all the other guards and visitors, something happened that no one expected. Officer Daniels had spent years working in the prison, following protocol, keeping his emotions locked away. But that day, something changed. Seeing Lily's tiny, tired feet in those worn-out shoes, knowing she had walked 10 miles just to spend a few minutes with her mother, it hit him in a way nothing else ever had. He turned away quickly, blinking back tears, but the lump in his throat wouldn't go away. Lily, unaware of the emotions stirring in the guard's heart, kept talking to her mother through the thick glass. Sarah was doing her best to smile, but Daniels could see the pain in her eyes. And mother watching her little girl struggle, knowing she couldn't do anything about it. She pressed her hand to the glass, mirroring Lily's, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. That night, Daniels couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the little girl walking those long, lonely miles. He thought about the times he had watched her sit outside the prison gates, rubbing her aching legs before making the long journey back home. He had always followed the rules, kept his distance, but now he felt like a failure. He was supposed to uphold justice, but what kind of justice let an 8-year-old suffer like this? Lily's journey hadn't just been hard on her physically. It had taken a toll on her heart too. She had started keeping secrets, hiding the truth from people who asked too many questions. She knew if someone found out she was walking alone every day, they might try to stop her, and she couldn't let that happen. She needed to see her mom. At school, Lily struggled to stay awake. Her teachers noticed the way her head drooped during lessons, how she rubbed her tired eyes and winced when she shifted in her chair. But whenever anyone asked if she was okay, she just smiled and said she was fine. No one knew the truth, that every morning before the sun even rose, she was already on the road. That by the time she sat in her classroom, she had already walked 10 miles and seen her mother through a thick sheet of glass. But not everyone was blind to her pain. Mrs. Thompson, Lily's teacher, had been watching her closely. She had seen the changes, Lily's once bright energy dimming, her small frame growing thinner, her shoes falling apart. And when she asked Lily where she went every morning, the little girl hesitated just a second too long before saying, "Just for a walk." A walk? Every single day? Mrs. Thompson wasn't convinced. She knew something wasn't right. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels was fighting his own battle. He couldn't stop thinking about Lily. He had been in this job long enough to know that sometimes the rules weren't fair. He had seen people locked away for mistakes they had made when they had no other choice. And he had seen families torn apart. But there was something about Sarah's case that didn't sit right with him. Late one night, long after his shift had ended, Daniels did something he had never done before. He dug into Sarah's file. He knew he wasn't supposed to, but he had to know more. And what he found made his stomach twist. Sarah hadn't been some dangerous criminal. She had made one bad choice, one desperate decision to try and protect her child. The details were messy, complicated, but Daniels could see the truth between the lines. Sarah wasn't a bad person, and yet she was paying the ultimate price, while Lily suffered every day just to be close to her. The next morning, when Lily arrived at the prison, something was different. Daniels was waiting for her, standing outside the gates. He had never spoken to her before, never directly, but today he couldn't stay silent. "Lily," he called gently, kneeling down so he was at her eye level. She hesitated, gripping the straps of her backpack. No one had ever stopped her before. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her secret pressing down on her. She wanted to stay strong, but something about the way Daniels looked at her, like he really cared, made the tears spill over. She hadn't cried in a long time. Daniels placed a hand on his chest, taking a shaky breath. "I know how much you love your mom. And I know you've been walking all this way just to see her." His voice broke slightly. "But you're just a little girl, Lily. You shouldn't have to go through this alone." Lily wiped her eyes quickly, shaking her head. "But I have to see her. She's all I have." Daniels swallowed hard. He wanted to promise her that everything would be okay, but he couldn't. What he could do, though, was make sure she didn't have to suffer in silence. And that's when he made a decision that would change everything. Lily stared at Officer Daniels, her small hands gripping the straps of her backpack like she was afraid to let go. No one had ever told her she didn't have to do this alone. No one had ever looked at her with the kind of kindness he did now. "But if I don't come, she'll think I left her," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. Daniels felt his chest tighten. He had seen inmates break down, had witnessed families torn apart by mistakes and circumstances, but nothing had ever hit him quite like this little girl standing before him, trying so hard to be strong. "I promise," Daniels said softly, "you won't lose her." Lily didn't know why, but she believed him. That day, instead of watching from the background, Daniels walked Lily inside himself. Other guards gave him questioning looks, but he ignored them. He stood close as Lily placed her hands against the glass, watching as Sarah's face lit up at the sight of her daughter. But something was different this time. Daniels wasn't the only one watching. Mrs. Thompson had done her own digging after her suspicions about Lily grew. She had made phone calls, spoken to people who knew Sarah, and what she found out shook her. She learned that Sarah had taken the fall for something she hadn't even done, covering for someone she thought she could trust. The sentence had been harsh, unfair, but no one had fought for her, until now. When Daniels got a call that night from an unknown number, he almost didn't answer. But when he heard Mrs. Thompson's voice on the other end, urgency in her tone, he knew this was bigger than he thought. The next few weeks were a blur. Daniels and Mrs. Thompson worked behind the scenes, gathering information, finding the right people to listen. It wasn't easy. Nothing about the justice system ever was, but they didn't stop. Not this time, because now it wasn't just about Sarah. It was about Lily. It was about giving a little girl her mother back. Lily kept coming to the prison, still walking miles every day, but she didn't know that, beyond those walls, something was shifting. She didn't know that Daniels had found a lawyer willing to take Sarah's case. She didn't know that Mrs. Thompson had reached out to people who could make a difference. Then, one morning, just as the sun was rising, there was a knock at Lily's door. She opened it hesitantly, rubbing her tired eyes. And there, standing on the porch, was Officer Daniels, but he wasn't in his uniform. He was holding a piece of paper, and when he knelt down to her level, there were tears in his eyes. "Lily," he said, voice thick with emotion, "your mom is coming home." For a moment, Lily didn't move. She didn't even breathe. She just stared at him, waiting for him to say it was a mistake, that she had imagined it. But then she saw the way his lips trembled, the way his hands shook slightly as he held out the paper, and then it hit her. Her mother was free. The moment Sarah stepped out of the prison gates, Lily ran faster than she ever had before. Faster than all those miles she had walked. Faster than the exhaustion, the pain, the loneliness. She ran straight into her mother's arms. And this time, there was no glass between them. Daniel stood off to the side, watching as mother and daughter clung to each other, sobbing, whispering words no one else could hear. He felt something break inside him. But this time, it wasn't pain. It was relief. It was hope. Lily had walked miles every day just to see her mother. But this time, she wasn't walking alone. She was walking home.